Well, once again, it is a great kindness that I have been allowed to address you again. It was a great kindness to have me come out in the first place, and then also for you to continue to be here this evening. Those of you who are here this morning, I want to say thank you for putting forward that effort. I know that sometimes it's not easy to get out of the house. Sometimes you've got kids, you've got things that happen to you. Sometimes you have long nights on Saturday. I know there are many things that can happen. My mom used to say, many a slip between the cup and the lip. That is, our intentions do not always materialize into actions. But you were here this morning and you're here this evening. And both of those are a demonstration of your values. All people demonstrate their values through their choices. And you chose to be here tonight, and I'm very thankful for that. And I'm glad that I'm able to address you this evening. This evening we're going to talk about some things about our past. This morning we talked about the state of the saints in Corinth and the things that he said would make it so that they had no inheritance in the kingdom. But I get ahead of myself. This morning we talked about coming to terms. This idea of saying things that we need to understand before we embark upon our communication, before we embark on our lesson. And the few things that I want to talk about this morning is God created us all to live by His will, according to His expectations He has for all of us. And God's will is not just abstract rules. They are better for us to follow. We have better things in our life. We have grace in our life when we follow the things that He says. Einstein one time said that God does not play dice with the universe. Well, He also doesn't play Simon Says. He doesn't give us things to do just to watch us jump through hoops to trip us up. He tells us what is better for us so that we will have benefit in our lives. So when we sin, we are failing God's righteous expectations. And so when we sin, we are separated from His will. We are separated from His purpose. We are separated from community and fellowship with Him. And so it's important for us to understand that sin is not just, I didn't hit all the buttons the right way. We are not only failing ourselves, we're failing God. And so it's important for us to understand that through Christ, God has allowed sinners, people who had lived in sin, had made these wrong choices, to live a very different life. And I don't mean just in a kind of a theoretical way. I mean in a very real, very existential way. And I don't mean to scare you with big words, but existential means you're living the thing you're saying. It's not just theoretically true, it's actually really true. If you think about it this way, there is no such thing as a completely theoretical faith. We cannot believe in Christ in theory. It has to be something that is acted upon. It has to be something that is a part of the way that we act and the way that we walk. And so the person who was a sinner is now living a very different life altogether. We said this morning that we are cleansed through baptism and the atoning blood of Jesus. That we are completely holy. We are set apart from the world and really set apart from the way that we used to live and set apart for God's purposes. We are righteous and innocent. And so our lives continue to be what God intended us to be. The reality is that we are not immediately innocent and righteous in the things that we do. I think it's important for us to talk about this for just a minute. Yes, we are declared righteous and declared innocent, but we still live. And I'm going to tell you that once you come out of that water, there's some adjustment time. You have to change. You have to do some things differently. And those things don't happen all at one time. And you aren't doing a lot of that changing on your own. God provides help for you in the way that you live differently. So your innocence over time becomes real and actual because then you start to live differently. Now, I think that's important for us to understand because I know some people get very distressed when they're first saved. They say, well, I got baptized and I thought that was going to fix all the sin. Well, okay, it did the things that you had done, and now you're changing the way you live. You're going to become innocent in the way that you walk. But sometimes we forget what our old life was like. We forget the damage that we had done to ourselves. Sometimes, because it's easier, we forget the damage we did to other people. Sometimes we forget all that God did to make us different. I'm going to tell you, it is not always easy to be different. If you make that choice to put on Christ, and you still have to face your peers, you still have to face your coworkers, you still have to face some people that you respect, and you say, I don't live that way anymore, it's not easy to do. But that's when we're forgetting all that's been done to make us innocent. That's all when we forget all the things that we've done to be holy. So when we forget this, we get ourselves in a whole lot of trouble. Sometimes we tell ourselves stories that our former life was really not all that bad. I've heard many people, and it saddens me to say this, they say, before I got saved, I really didn't do anything wrong. I just knew I just kind of had to get baptized because the Bible said so. And that worries me, because if you think you didn't do anything wrong, we've got some problems. That means your former life of sin, you're going, it wasn't all that bad. Sometimes we tell ourselves stories about our former life, and we kind of glorify it. Man, I'll tell you what, back in the day, I was the stuff. I had it going on. I was so good at all the things that I was doing. And you're saying, well, okay, you're glorifying that former life of sin. What are you thinking about your life right now? I mean, this is supposed to be better. So why in the world would you talk about how great things were before? And one of the dangers we're going to see tonight is another kind of a danger, is that when you don't tell yourself the truth about your changed life, you start to think that other people need to give you your justice. You think, I deserve better than this. I deserve for other people to respect me. I deserve for other people to be right by me. And that's what's going on in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. You had some people who were taking one another to court. They were suing each other, and they were going, as Paul says, they were going before the ungodly judges to have ungodly judges kind of decide things about justice. And he says, guys, not only, first of all, should you have people to be able to settle this in your church, but second of all, did you forget where you came from? And so starting in verse 9 of 1 Corinthians chapter 6, you might get tired of hearing this, but I want to impress this upon you. We're going to read this just about every night of our meeting, but I want us to have this impressed upon us. Do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor homosexuals, nor thieves, nor the covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. Such were some of you. But you were washed. You were sanctified, but you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and the Spirit of our God. Now, when he speaks to the congregation at Corinth and he says these things, I want him to be speaking to us too. I want to understand that when we read this list of the failures that keep us away from the kingdom of God, most of us can find at least something in here that we remember that was a part of our former life too. Maybe a couple of them. I'm not saying we need to check all the boxes in our Bibles, but I'm saying we can identify with these saints if we're honest with ourselves about their former lives. So some of the saints in Corinth had previously been swindlers and thieves and covetous of others. So let's not be so naive as to think that our brethren did not struggle with these kind of sins before they came to the Lord. It is easy sometimes to look at our fellow sisters and brothers in our congregation, and we will think, well, you don't know what I struggle with. Well, you don't know what they struggled with. You don't know what things they had to come out of. You don't know what battles they are still fighting today. And I think we also need to be careful. We shouldn't be so haughty as to think we don't all still struggle with these things after coming to the Lord. Because many of our pasts will come back, sometimes with a vengeance. Sometimes we'll be tempted to go back to those old things we were really good at doing, even though those were really bad for us and bad for others. The new life that God provided for his saints, it allows us to overcome this idea of swindling. Swindling is a form of theft. It just has a lot of lying to do with it. It is taking from someone else because you've tricked them into it. The idea of theft would be a little more open. You're just taking something that somebody else is. And the idea of covetousness. And so for the purposes of our lesson, I want to go ahead and review a few things. And most of these we know, but we need to understand the way that we're going to live them in our lives. That God protected personal property rights from robbery in the law. God cared about what belonged to someone else. And if he says it belongs to someone else, it belongs to someone else. It doesn't belong to you. And we need to understand that God cares about that. We need to understand that praising God for His provision allows us to cultivate a spirit of contentment. You and I, the more we think about the things that God has given us, the less upset we are that somebody else has more than us, because we're happy for the things that God has given us. And I think it's important for us to remember. And lastly, Christ calls us to stop stealing. But He doesn't stop there, because He also calls us to start selflessly supporting others. We are to be not only taking, we are to be giving people. And it's important that this is part of the change that He has called us to make in our lives. This first idea that God protected personal property rights and from robbery, it starts all the way back in Exodus. I've been doing a series of the Ten Commandments back at home in Wildercroft, and one of the things we've noticed is that all of the Ten Commandments have quite a bit of content throughout the Scriptures, not just in the Old Testament, but also in the New. Now, we don't live under the Ten Commandments like that. We live it in a very full way. We live it in a very mature way. And so we see the elements of these things, of God's will in the Ten Commandments, and we live them as fully as we can in Christ. So in Exodus chapter 20, we're reading verse 15. Very short, very easy. You shall not steal. In verse 17, you have a kind of a connected idea. He said, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. And of course, these are repeated in Deuteronomy chapter 5. Now, I said that these things are connected, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but most of us can understand that they are connected because they are both about respecting ownership of someone else. The first disrespects the ownership of another by taking whatever is theirs and making it mine. Well, that's a nice thing you have there. It's mine now. That thing you had, it belongs to me. And so it is not respecting that someone else owned that because you have made it your own. The second one is somewhat similar. It is obsessing over the fact that something that belongs to another person isn't mine. And I can't let that idea go. I want that thing, that person. I want that property. I want that house. I want that car. I want that vacation. And they have it and I don't, and I don't like that. And so we obsess. This idea of coveting totally ignores the things that we have, that we've been given, because we say, I can't be happy until I have that thing that they have. Both of these violations, they disrespect God's provision, and they disrespect the well-being of others. Think about this for a minute. If I'm not happy with what God made, I'm telling myself a story, I'm not happy with what God gave me because someone has something I want. I'm not focusing on the things that I have that are blessings from God. I want that thing. How very like a toddler. So I've got 5 kids, and so I've seen this a couple times. There is a toy that my 2-year-old has not played with in I don't know how long. But that brand new baby comes along, picks it up. Mine! She hadn't cared about that thing. She hadn't even looked at it. But once someone else had it, I got to have my thing back. And so that's when the arguments start. Well, they started before that, but that's when the arguments happen. The other thing is, I'm not happy that my neighbor has something that's of benefit to them. Now, this is a little bit more higher level thinking. I need to be happy that what they have is good for them. Now, that takes a lot of maturity on our part, doesn't it? Because sometimes we have to get over that feeling of, I wish I had that, and start to tell ourselves, I'm glad they have that. That is a blessing God has provided them, and I'm glad that God has taken care of them that way, and I'm glad they're happy. Being happy for the blessings of another person, not an easy thing, but certainly what we're striving for. That is the most mature way to understand this. Now, in Leviticus 19, I want to read a couple of things that have to do with what we would call the holiness laws. I don't know if other people call them that. I call them the holiness laws because they are rooted in this idea of how to remain holy. Another way we can look at these, sometimes I talk about them being the Jerry Springer laws. These are laws that have to do with a lot of the terrible behaviors that human beings get into, like you might see on one of those trashy daytime television shows. And they bicker and they fight over the dumbest stuff, and they expose their terrible sins as if they're proud of them. But we're not going to talk about those particular ones tonight. We'll get into those later on in the week. But in Leviticus 19, starting in verse 2, this gives us a rubric for understanding this. He said, "Speak to all the congregation of the sons of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, Yahweh, your God, am holy." That's his basis for understanding everything he's going to say after this. So every time he says, "I am Yahweh," he's not saying it because I told you so, sometimes like our parents did, or sometimes we still do with our kids. He's saying it because this is my character, this is my nature, and you're going to be like me. Now this morning we already covered on the idea that we're going to be holy. He cared enough to make us holy. But starting again, if you will, with me in verse 9. "Now when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. Nor shall you glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the needy and for the stranger. I am the Lord your God. You shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. You shall not swear falsely by my name, so as to profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not oppress your neighbor, nor rob him. The wages of a hired man are not to remain with you all night until morning. You shall not curse a deaf man, nor place a stumbling block before the blind. But you shall revere your God. I am the Lord." Living as God's holy people meant using his nature and character as a basis for their actions. Theft here is categorized along with a lot of other things that are failing to provide for the poor. This idea of failing to pay the workers on time. He says to deal falsely. That's another way of saying swindle. This idea that you're going to get ahead on somebody else because you've presented the situation differently than it is, and you come out on top, and they don't. I think it's interesting that he puts in close proximity to this idea of taking advantage of the handicapped just for a laugh. Well, who would do something like that? Who in the world would do something like that? Well, he wants you to have that reaction. Well, who would do that? Who would take every last bit of grain out of their field that they could so that other people wouldn't have anything? Who had any care for humanity, would take advantage of other people who didn't have? Sometimes when we want something bad enough, we will do the unthinkable. So robbery in this case is accounted among the sins that fail to show loyalty toward a neighbor. When we are being righteous toward our fellow humans, we respect what they have and also the things that help them to have success. I not only am glad that they have what they have, I'm going to do what I can to contribute. I'm going to do what I can to make sure they have a little bit more if possible. As opposed to making sure I've got mine, I need to make sure that they have enough for them. So when we steal from others, we are in rebellion against what God has seen to provide for both them and us. In Proverbs chapter 30, you have an interesting sort of prayer. I'm glad that Solomon was so wise as to record wise words of other people. I think that it is a great testament to his wisdom that along with his own words of wisdom, the words of Agur, in this case, now I don't necessarily know who this is. We have some talk about some oracle, but obviously you have someone smart, although in verse 2 he says he's not. I love the humility of that. But in verses 7 through 9, I want to listen to the wisdom of this prayer. 2 things I have asked of you. This is talking to God. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep deception and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the portion, or with the food that is my portion, that I not be full and deny you, and say, who is Lord? That I not be in want and steal, and profane the name of my God. Both great wealth and indeed great poverty can be challenges to our spiritual life before God. Now, I would say that in our current political climate, we would often think of only one of these 2 extremes as being detrimental. We might only think it is the wealthy people who are the naturally difficult spiritually ones, so the ones who have the bigger challenges spiritually. But here he says both ends of the spectrum can provide their own challenges. But I want to notice in this that being poor is not an automatic protection from selfishness and sin. I'm going to tell you right now, there were some times where I was very poor and I was not spiritually perfect. There were some times where I didn't have, we might say, 2 pennies to rub together, but I still had some struggles when it came to being happy with what I had. And so being poor and being rich both have their individual challenges in this. But I want to notice something interesting about what he says. Theft may be understandable as an act of desperation by the poor, but it remains sinful. Look at the prayer. He says, don't give me so much that I'm so arrogant that I just don't remember who God is. Now that is its own challenge. But he says, I don't want to become so poor that I steal from someone else. Now if you know that someone has stolen something, and then you hear about how poor they are, you go, I understand that a little bit better. I understand it a little bit more, that they were so poor, that they were destitute, that it was a desperation. But I'm going to tell you that when it's your property that they steal, it's a little bit harder to feel that kind of kindness, even if you hear that they're poor. You come outside and your car's gone. That's hard. And you have to go through the process, insurance claims, you have to wait and find out what happens. You feel violated. But if you hear, but they were really poor, it only makes it a little bit better. It's still a sin. And so theft, we have to understand, is, while being somewhat understandable, that doesn't make it not a sin. So even in every case, even in times of desperation, stealing is wrong. And I think most of us can say stealing wrong is not it's not a difficult concept for us to understand. In Luke chapter 3, we're going to start talking about this idea of when we remember what God has given us and we praise Him for it, we can cultivate an attitude of contentment. We're going to start looking in Luke chapter 3, and we're going to read the words of John the Immerser. We're going to start reading... In verse 3, it kind of gives us a little bit of a background for what's going on. It says, he, that is John, came into all the district around the Jordan, preaching a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. So he's preaching a type of baptism. Of course, it would prefigure the baptism that Jesus would bring about. And it is for this idea of repentance, changing the way you live from sin. But then in verse 7, he began saying to the crowds who were going out to be baptized by him, you brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come. Therefore, bear fruits in keeping with repentance, and do not begin to say to yourselves, we have Abraham for our father. For I say to you, from these stones God is able to raise up children to Abraham. Indeed, the axe is already laid at the root of the tree, so that every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. And the crowds were questioning him, saying, then what shall we do? They want to know, what does repentance really look like? Put some meat on that bone for me. Help me to understand what repentance really means for me. And he would answer and say to them, the man who has 2 tunics is to share with him who has none. And he who has food is to do likewise. And some tax collectors also came to be baptized. And they said to him, teacher, what shall we do? And he said to them, collect no more than what you have been ordered to. Some soldiers were questioning him, saying, and what about us? What shall we do? And he said to them, do not take money from anyone by force or accuse anyone falsely, and be content with your wages. You know, John was a lot of things, but a marketing genius he was not. He certainly knew how to get up in people's business very quickly. He didn't mince words. He said it exactly as it was, even when it was hard. So John the Immerser, he diagnosed several moral failures in Israel, and he preached the idea of repentance. There was a coming destruction on the nation. The good news of the Messiah was being preached against this background. And he even said that arrogant pride and nationality, it would prevent people from the righteousness they needed to act upon. But I want to notice particularly the kinds of sins he's talking about. He says, if you've got 2 and he's got none, share with that guy. If you've got food and he doesn't have any, share with him. Tax collectors. Is there a connection between tax collectors and greed? I think across the New Testament we can see that there probably is. If you understand how a tax collector works, a tax collector actually works for Rome. Now, he was generally a Jewish person, or wherever the province was, but he works for Rome. Now, Rome said, you're going to turn unto us this much money. I don't care how you get it, and I don't care what you charge other people. In fact, you're going to make your own wages. Just turn into me what you owe me. So, wait a minute. So you're saying that I can charge whatever I want, and I'm just going to give back to you what I'm supposed to give you? Yeah, that's fine. Oh, well, that's an invitation to sin, isn't it? You charge whatever you want, and you only have to turn back into Rome, but you have the authority to take whatever you say. Man, that's a tough position to be in. So you can understand how the average Jewish person would assume, in almost every case, a tax collector was a sinner. Not only does he work for the enemy, he takes our hard-earned wages. He lives off the money I made because I worked hard. And I don't know what he has to turn into Rome. No one does. He just tells me what to pay, and I am legally required to pay him. And I know the money is going to Rome. That guy. But the fact that Jesus had a tax collector and the apostles was not an accident. And that he had a zealot, the people who were trying to kill all the tax collectors, also in the apostles, also not an accident. But it's interesting in this that we are able to see the tax collectors. He says, look, don't take more than you're supposed to. You're the one who decides this, but you're supposed to be good to people. And the last one he talks to the soldiers. And talking to the soldiers were instructed to be content with their pay and not abuse the power of their station. In all of these cases, there can be a temptation to take what we think we deserve when we have the opportunity to do so. But contentment, it teaches us not to take, or in some cases keep, more than God's given us. But we're supposed to make sure that other people have what is rightfully theirs. Now, the thing that he talks about soldiers is interesting to me because corruption among those people who have great power is easy. Even in today's climate, I know there are many, many news stories that talk about abuse of power with those people who work for the public good, the public trust. And it's a sad situation. And every time it happens, it's like, oh, I hate that this is the case. But it's not a new problem. This is a very old problem. Sometimes we have the capacity to do something that benefits us and hurts other people. Here he says, you need to learn contentment with what you've been paid. In Hebrews chapter 13, we have an interesting section of the book of Hebrews. He's getting toward the end of his letter, the Hebrew writer is, and toward the end of this letter, he does something interesting. He gives some very short and straightforward commandments. Whether or not they're connected is sort of up to discussion, but I want to notice in the first 6 verses something here. He says, let the love of the brethren continue. The Greek word there is Philadelphia, this idea of loving your brother as yourself. But he starts off the second verse with another word, and he says, philoxenias, which is the love of the strangers. Now it says hospitality here, but sometimes we have this idea that hospitality just means having the Andersons over for another potluck. But hospitality doesn't mean just that. Hospitality means taking care of people you don't know for their benefit, even opening your home. So he says, let the love of the brethren continue. And he says, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. He says, remember the prisoners as though in prison with them, and those who are ill-treated, since you yourselves are also in the body. He says in verse 4, marriage is to be held in honor among all, and the marriage bed is to be undefiled. For fornicators and adulterers God will judge, and we'll talk about that later on the week. But he says in verse 5, as he brings this section kind of to a close, he says, make sure that your character is free from the love of money, being content with what you have. For he himself has said, I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you. So that we may confidently say, the Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What will man do to me? This final set of instructions in the Hebrew letter almost sound like the 10 Commandments, which is a bit ironic since you have the Hebrew writer writing this entire letter to talk about the supremacy of the new covenant over the old. But he gave these last instructions to the Jewish saints, telling them to learn to be content, learn contentment. Now, a few of these other commands also require contentment. Hosting is expensive. You can ask Bill right now what an expensive and terrible guest I am right now. I'm sure that he will give you the full rundown and maybe even an itemized list of the things that he has done to take care of me. He's been gracious in doing that, but it's not a cheap thing to do. When you have someone stay with you, you have to put forward things and even buy things you wouldn't normally buy because you don't know what they like to eat for breakfast. You don't know, do they like peaches and bananas? I'll get them both. So you end up spending more than you normally would when you have someone in your home, whether you know them or whether you don't. But truly loving our brethren, even the hurting, he talks about those people who are in prison, it requires an idea of contentment. I spent a lot more helping people than I normally would. And things are going to be really tight for the next month. But it's going to be okay. I'm content. So this is certainly a quality that we need to be able to learn if we're going to do the rest of these things. So contentment is rooted in faith that God is not only present, but is faithful to His Word. Notice the two quotations he says here. Just if you've ever done this is a neat deal. The two quotations that he quotes here. The first is this God's promise to Joshua before leading the people into the land of Canaan. Joshua was leading an entire nation in a military fashion to eradicate people who were stronger and bigger and more supplied than them. And God says, don't worry about it. I've got you on this. Stay strong and courageous. I'm not going to leave you. Go in. You can do this. The second quotation is from several places in the Psalms, and some of those are where David is conquering foes. David is having to deal with military problems, insurrection in the kingdom. He's dealing with all of these difficulties that David had to go with. Sometimes his life is on the line. When you read about David's life and all the times that he took his life into his own hands to do the right thing, and here he says, I'm not going to be afraid. What can man do to me? These are the two quotations the Hebrew writer uses. But you and I still worry about money. They had faith enough to conquer nations. And we're worried about whether I can really take care of somebody who needs it. 1 Timothy chapter 6. Timothy was instructed to remain with the congregation in Ephesus to help that congregation learn some very important lessons. But some of the lessons are also for Timothy. Starting in verse 3 of 1 Timothy 6. If anyone advocates a different doctrine and does not agree with sound words, those of our Lord Jesus Christ, and with the doctrine conforming to godliness, he is conceited, understands nothing, but he has a morbid interest in controversial questions and disputes about words, out of which arise envy, strife, abusive language, and evil suspicions. Constant friction between men of depraved mind and deprived of the truth, who suppose that godliness is a means of gain. But godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. For we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. If we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge men into ruin and destruction. Verse 10, of course, is the famous one. For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil. And some, by longing for it, have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. It's amazing how often we get that quotation wrong. But certainly, in the context, helps us to understand exactly what he's saying. A lack of contentment with what we have leads us down a very sad and self-destructive path. It is amazing the kind of things that people will put themselves through in order to earn a quick buck. I'm always amazed at the ingenuity of criminals. And that's kind of a funny thing. When you read about all of the different scams that people have put together, even scams that run a long time, and you can say, wow, that takes a lot of work. I don't know that I could deal with all that stress. And I'm amazed if they would use a lot of that same energy and even same thoughtfulness to helping people, they would be in a much better position without all the fear and stress. In this, it's interesting. that he says, look, when you're trying to make the quick buck, make the easy buck, you end up hurting yourself more than you end up doing anything that would be beneficial. Timothy is warned here that there's a connection between greed and adopting false doctrine. I'm going to admit, for the longest time, I didn't understand this. When you're a preacher, you understand it. Because there are people who want you to either go soft on an issue because it's uncomfortable. They want you to change your position on something, and they will find ways to make it attractive. If you don't think that people will try to influence a preacher through their pay, you haven't talked to Bill. I know that he's seen this several occasions. I know I've seen it several times. Even subtle things. Well, you got a family to look after. That's cold, man. That's really getting after somebody. But people will absolutely use money to either get a preacher to change his views on something. And the reality is, when you look at the big flashy congregations and you look at the preacher who's got the big car and the nice, really super fancy suits, I'm not talking about the K&G stuff, I'm talking about the real nice suits. And then you start to look at the things that they have to do to be able to make that kind of money. Oh, they have to change their standards of right and wrong to do that. I got it. He warns Timothy, he says, stay away from that. Don't get involved with that stuff. So it's important for us to understand that it's no less true today than it was 2,000 years ago. And I want to say one other thing. This is probably going to get me in some trouble, but that's okay. I'm leaving, and Bill will deal with it later. I want to talk about swindling for just a minute. This idea of those who think that godliness is a means of gain. I know that there are a lot of people who get involved in these schemes, and not always, but a lot of times nowadays it's women. And a lot of times you have this new thing. It's a brand new thing. And it's going to be, you have some quick residual income. And all you have to do is get in my downline. And they start looking at women's Bible classes. They start looking at their sisters. And they start preying on them because they're trying to bump up their numbers for their MLM scheme. Look, there is just as much of a problem with that as there at a preacher who's looking to fleece a congregation of their funds. We do not need to be looking at our brothers and sisters as a way to make money. That is inappropriate and it is incorrect. And I think we need to be very careful about that. But he also says something in verse 17. He talks about another group of people. In verse 17, he says, instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited or to fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so they may take hold of that which is life indeed. There are people who are in the body who have money, but they do not have the sinful love of it. One does not always mean the other. I think we need to be careful about that to understand the difference. Being blessed with physical wealth in this world is an opportunity to make spiritual investments. And oftentimes that happens when we help our brothers and sisters to make sure that other people, the ones who don't have, can do the things that they would like to do or just have the things that they need. So it's important for us to realize that. This leads us into the final thing. We're not just not stealing anymore, but we are giving to others. And so back to Ephesians chapter 4. I say back to, and in my mind we're going to be hitting this a lot. So you're going to hear some pieces of Ephesians 4 quite often. Starting in verse 17. Now I'm not going to read all the way from 17 to 32, but I want to start the idea here. Again, we will hit some of these more. So this I say and affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles also walk in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart, and they, having become callous, have given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. But you did not learn Christ in this way, if indeed you have heard him and been taught in him, just as truth is in Jesus, that in reference to your former manner of life, you lay aside the old self, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lust of deceit, and that you be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and put on the new self, which in the likeness of God has been created in righteousness and holiness of the truth. Isn't that what we talked about this morning? He says you can't live like you used to. You can't continue in those things that were part of your former life. That's not what you're called to do. Look, other people are still stuck in that. But that's not you. You are supposed to come out of that. And so he talks about several things that he says you're supposed to leave behind. He talks about lying. He talks about being angry or letting anger eat us up. But in verse 28, he said, he who steals must steal no longer, but rather he must labor, performing with his own hands what is good, so that he will have something to share with the one who has need. The faculties we used to engage in our previous failures are now employed for righteousness. Sin is very effective in using all of our life to accomplish evil. So we are called now to use all of our life to fulfill our original mission in God's will. The same hands that used to selfishly take from other people now work at the things that are good to help those who have need. Think about that for a minute. The same hands, these same things I've got in my possession, my hands, I used to use these to take from others. But in my new life, Jesus is allowing me to use the same hands that were so covered in sin to do good things, to work hard, so that I have something to give to somebody else. What a beautiful reversal. What a beautiful change he allows us to engage in. We selfishly took, but now we generously give. In chapter 5, verses 1 through 5, it talks a little bit about this idea of thankfulness. He says to be imitators of God as beloved children. He says walk in love in verse 2, just as Christ also loved you and gave himself up for us, an offering, a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. He says, but immorality, specifically sexual immorality, impurity, that is the kind of general badness, or greed must not even be named among you, as is proper for saints. There must be no filthiness and silly talk or coarse jesting, which are not fitting. He says, but what? But rather giving of thanks. For this you know with certainty that no immoral or impure person or covetous man who is an idolater has an inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Notice in the middle of that, he talks about the fact that there's supposed to be not greed named among us. But then he talks about what kind of speech is the other side of it. Giving of thanks. Think about that for a minute. One of the solutions to greed still staying in us or coming back in our lives is we give thanks with our mouth. I'm a whole lot less inclined to have problems with coveting other people's things or wanting to hold everything myself if I'm thankful in my speech for what I have. And I say it out loud. Thank you, God, for providing this for me. Thank you for giving this to me. Thank you for taking care of my family. Thank you for giving me the ability to work. And when I talk that way, all the time, I'm able to curb some of those heart problems that I've got with greed and also with covetousness. So maintaining a heart of covetousness and obsession with more is nothing less than idolatry. And we will talk about that later on in the week. One last passage, and we'll end up here. If you'll turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Sometimes it's good to just have a good example. And in 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9, we have some great examples for us. He actually talks about example when he starts off in chapter 8. He brings up a good example. He says, now, brethren, we wish to make known to you the grace of God which has been given in the churches at Macedonia, or in churches of Macedonia. Macedonia is a region, so there's several churches there. That in a great ordeal of affliction, their abundance of joy and their deep poverty overflowed in the wealth of their liberality. That's a big fancy way of saying they were poor, but they gave a lot. He said these churches, they didn't have much, but they gave even what they didn't have. He says, "For I testify that according to their own ability and beyond their ability, they gave of their own accord, begging us with much urging for the favor of participation in the support of the saints. And this not as we had expected, but they first gave themselves to the Lord and to us by the will of God. So we urged Titus, that he had previously made a beginning, so he would also complete in you this gracious work as well. But just as you abound in everything, in faith and utterance and knowledge, and all earnestness of the love inspired in you, see to that you abound in this gracious work also." So he brings up these other churches, and he goes, okay, now you guys too. And we learn later on that they were one of the first people to really talk about doing this. He says, "I'm not speaking this as a command, but as proving through the earnestness of the others the sincerity of your love also. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich." This generous work of support is a key theme throughout Acts and the epistles. It comes up a lot. When we start to see all the different places he talks about this gift of support. The Gentile congregations selflessly gave of their limited funds to help the Jewish saints who were hurting in Judea. And in doing so, they were following the example of Jesus, who was wealthy beyond measure. I mean, not even in physical terms. He was wealthy in ways that you and I can literally not fathom. Yet he became poor for us. And of course, in the second section in chapter 9, when he talks about this again, and this will be the last passage we read, in verse 5, "So I thought it necessary to urge the brethren that they would go on ahead to you to arrange beforehand your previously promised bountiful gift." See, they promised first, that Corinth did. "So the same would be ready as bountiful gift, not affected by covetousness. Now this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must do just as he has purposed in his heart, not grudgingly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that always having all sufficiency in everything, you may have an abundance for every good deed. As it is written, he scattered abroad, he gave to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. Now he who supplies the seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in everything for all liberality, which through us is producing thanksgiving to God." Corinth had promised earlier to give to the work. Paul is reminding them of their previous promise to make sure they got it ready. So the free giving of the saints was to be done with an attitude, he says, that God would provide in loyalty. It is important that when we give, and even when we give till it hurts, it is a demonstration of our faith in God, because he's going to take care of us. Not if you give, you'll become rich, but if you give in loyalty, he's loyal to you to make sure you have what you need to continue to be good and give. And so in this, we're able to see what the right attitude is to have. So for all of us here, we think about our former life. And we think about the things that we had done in selfishness. We think about the ways that we had taken from others to benefit ourselves, or the things that we had done that were not exactly kind, so that we could get ahead in the world. He says, such were some of you. Who are you today? Are you living a life that is free from taking what belongs to others? Are you learning to be content with the things that God has given to you? And are you willingly and faithfully giving to those who have needs? Now, maybe you've never made that promise. Maybe you've never made that commitment. But if today you understand, I have not respected what other people have, and I know that I need to be washed, I need to be holy from here on, and I need to be innocent, you can do that today. If you have never studied the Scriptures, we want to sit down with you, we want to study the Scriptures with you, and you'll see the Scriptures tell you the truth about life. But if you read the Scriptures, you know what they say, you know what you need to do. You know that you can come to Him today, knowing for sure that He is the King, He is the chosen Savior, He is the Son of God. He is a demonstration of God's grace and goodness. And you can say out loud what you know to be true. I'm going to follow Him for the rest of my life. I'm going to change the way I live. But I also know that I need help. He's promised that help. Because the life that you live, the life of failure, the life of selfishness, can be crucified on the cross with him, buried in the waters of baptism, and you can ask God to raise you up a brand new creature. If this evening you have a spiritual need, if this evening you know that you need to have that change in your life, we'd ask that you make it known now as we stand and as we sing.